The blood trail in the snow told a story
taking
nobody
Fort
wanted
Grant.
to read. It started at the ridge, wound down through the aspens, and ended at the abandoned horse shed behind Ethan Walker's cabin. Each drop was frozen crimson against white like rubies scattered by a careless hand. The February wind carried no sound that morning, just the kind of silence that comes before everything changes. Ethan had been up since before dawn, checking his trap lines in the Colorado high country. 34 years on this earth, the last 6 of them alone on this mountain, and he'd learned to read signs the way other men read newspapers. Bear tracks meant move your stores higher. Wolf scat meant keep the rifle loaded, but human blood in fresh snow, that meant trouble was already here. He followed the trail with his Winchester ready boots crunching through the crust. The shed door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the darkness was thick as molasses, but he could hear breathing. Ragged, multiple sources trying to stay quiet, but failing. "I know you're in there," he called out, keeping his voice steady. "I'm armed, but I'm alone. State your business." The breathing stopped. Then a woman's voice, strong, despite exhaustion. "We mean no harm. We needed shelter. Step out where I can see you." "We can't. Not all of us." Ethan's finger rested on the trigger guard. In his years as an Army translator, he'd heard that tone before. Not defiance. Desperation wrapped in dignity. How many? 5. Armed, with nothing but frost and hunger. He stepped closer, letting his eyes adjust. What he saw made him lower the rifle. 5 Apache women huddled in the corner, wrapped in torn blankets and each other. The youngest couldn't have been more than 16, her leg wrapped in bloody cloth. The one who'd spoken, she stood slightly forward, protective. Her dress was deerskin torn across the shoulder, revealing skin marked with fresh burns. Her black hair hung loose, matted with something dark. Could have been mud. Could have been blood. "Name's Ethan Walker. This is my land." The woman studied his face in the dim light. "I am Ayanna. These are my sisters. Not by blood, but by loss. That blood trail leads right to my door. Someone following you. Not anymore." Her eyes held his. "They think we burned with our shelters. 3 nights ago. Bounty hunters came looking for warriors who weren't there. Found widows instead. Didn't matter to them." The youngest one whimpered. Another woman, older, broad-shouldered, pressed a hand to the girl's forehead and whispered something in Apache. Ethan caught most of it. Something about staying strong, staying quiet. "You speak our language," Ayanna noticed. "Some. Enough to know she's running a fever. Her name is Nina. The wound won't close. We've walked for 3 days through the snow." Ayanna's voice didn't break, but something in her eyes shifted. "I saw your smoke from the ridge. 1 cabin, 1 man. Figured you'd either help us or shoot us. Either way, the running would stop." Ethan looked at them again. 5 women who'd lost everything betting their lives on the mercy of a stranger. In the Army, he'd seen what happened to Apache women caught alone. He'd tried to stop it once. Got 3 broken ribs and a dishonorable discharge for his trouble. But that was 6 years ago. 6 years of hiding from the world, talking to no one but his horses and the wind. "Can you walk?" "Most of us." "Then walk to the cabin. I'll carry the girl." Ayanna's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because in about 2 hours, this snow's going to start again, and that trail you left will be covered. Because that girl needs hot water and clean bandages. And because—" He paused, then spoke the truth. "Because I've seen enough Apache women die for no good reason." He moved toward Nina, slow hands visible. The older woman tensed, but Ayanna touched her arm. A silent conversation passed between them. Then Ayanna nodded. Ethan lifted Nina carefully. She weighed almost nothing, bird bones and fever dreams. Her eyes fluttered open, focused on his face. "I know you," she whispered in English. "You're confused, child. Rest now." But her hand reached up, touched a scar on his jaw. "The soldier who stood between us and the rifles. At Fort Grant. You saved my mother." The shed went silent. Ethan's chest tightened. Fort Grant. The massacre the Army called a misunderstanding. 43 Apache dead. He'd saved one family, gotten court-martialed for it. Your mother died last winter, natural, peaceful. She spoke of you until the end. Nina's eyes closed again. Said you were the only white man who ever bled for us. Ayanna stepped closer, studying Ethan with new eyes. This is true. It was a long time ago. Time doesn't erase blood debts. He carried Nina toward the cabin, the others following. The sun was climbing now, turning the snow field into blinding white. Behind them, the wind was already softening their tracks. By noon, it would be like they'd never passed through at all. At the cabin door, Ethan stopped and turned to Ayanna. I live alone for a reason. I don't know how to host people anymore. She almost smiled. We don't need a host. We need a chance. Then you'll have it. They entered, one by one. The cabin was warm, simple, built for function, not comfort. One room, a stove, a bed in the corner, shelves lined with preserves and ammunition. The women didn't comment on the Spartan surroundings. They'd lived with less. As Ethan laid Nina near the fire and began heating water, Ayanna stood beside him. We won't stay long. He looked at her, at the burns on her shoulder, the exhaustion carved into her face, the way she still stood straight, despite everything. Stay as long as you need. Men always want something in return. Then I'm not most men. She studied him, this hermit who spoke Apache, who carried battle scars for defending her people, who offered shelter without conditions. No, she said quietly, I'm beginning to see that you're not. Outside, the snow began to fall again, erasing the last evidence of their arrival. But inside, something new was beginning. Not just survival, something more dangerous and more necessary. The first fragile threads of trust. The Colorado Territory in 1882 was a land caught between worlds. Not quite civilized, not quite wild. The silver boom had brought men with soft hands and hard hearts, while the Apache Wars had left scars across the landscape deeper than any mine shaft. It was perfect country for the forgotten, the banished, and the broken. Perfect country for a man like Ethan Walker. He'd built his cabin 6 years back when the discharge papers were still fresh and the bruises had finally faded to yellow. Picked this spot specifically, 12 miles from the nearest town, high enough that winter would discourage visitors, close enough to water that he wouldn't die of thirst. The locals in Silver Creek knew him as the hermit who came down once a month for supplies paid in cash, spoke to no one unless spoken to first. You running from the law, the store clerk had asked once. No, sir, running from everything else. That had ended the questions. In the Colorado high country, a man's past was his own business until it showed up with a warrant. The morning after the women arrived, Ethan woke to find them already working. No discussion, no asking permission. Ayanna was at the stove, boiling something that smelled of pine and medicine. The older woman, Mira, he'd learned, was cleaning Nina's wound with steady hands. The others moved around the cabin like they'd always been there, quiet, efficient, careful not to disturb his things, but unafraid to use what they needed. She'll live, Mira announced in accented English. The fever broke, but she needs rest, real rest, not running rest. Ethan approached Nina's bedroll. In daylight, he could see her clearly. 16, maybe 17, the same age as the girl he'd shielded at Fort Grant. Same cheekbones, same determined set to her jaw, even in sleep. Her mother's name, what was it? Salali, Ayanna answered. It means squirrel. She was always gathering, always preparing. She paused. Nina told us the story many times. The soldier who stood against his own. We thought it was a legend she'd made larger with telling. No legend. Just a man doing what should have been done by many, and losing everything for it. Ethan shrugged. Didn't lose everything. Lost a career built on lies. Gained a clear conscience. Ayanna studied him. In daylight, her beauty was different than what he'd expected. Not delicate. The frontier killed delicate things. But strong, carved by wind and loss into something elemental. The burns on her shoulder were healing, but would scar. Her hands were calloused from work nails broken, but she moved with grace that spoke of better times. "Tell me about the others," Ethan said. "Mira is our eldest. She had 3 sons, all killed at Cybecue Creek. Her husband died trying to retrieve their bodies. She knows healing, knows the old ways." Mira looked up at the mention of her name, nodded once, then returned to her work. Chenoa Ayana continued pointing to a woman mending a blanket by the window. "Lost her husband to cavalry justice. They said he stole horses. He was tending his own stock. She knows plants can make medicine from anything that grows." Chenoa was thin, sharp-featured, with eyes that tracked everything but revealed nothing. Halona was married to a peace chief. He tried negotiation instead of war. They shot him at his own table, called it a misunderstanding. She speaks 4 languages, writes in 2. The agents used her as a translator until she refused to lie for them anymore. Halona sat straight-backed dignity wrapped around her like armor. She caught Ethan looking and inclined her head slightly, acknowledgement between equals. "And you?" Ethan asked Ayana. "Me." She turned to the window. "I was wife to a scout. He worked for the army, believed cooperation would save us. They promised protection, citizenship, land rights. When the politics changed, they called him a spy, hung him from a cottonwood tree. I was 4 months pregnant. Lost the child running from the men who came after." The cabin fell silent except for the fire's crackle. "How long ago?" 8 months. The others found me. We became what you see. Not a tribe, not a family, but something between. Survivors. And the bounty hunters." Ayana's jaw tightened. "Led by a man named Jack Brennan. You know him." Ethan's blood chilled. "Sergeant Jack Brennan. 3rd Cavalry. You served together. We served in the same uniform, that's all. He burns camps for sport, claims he's looking for renegades, but he takes scalps from women and children, sells them in Mexico where they still pay bounty. He thinks you're dead. We set fires in our shelters before we ran, let them see the smoke, hear the screams. Chenoa is gifted with voices. She gave them a show they wanted to hear." Ethan moved to the window, scanning the tree line. "He's thorough. If he has doubts, he'll check. Then we'll be gone before he does." "Where would you go?" Ayana didn't answer. There was nowhere. They both knew it. The reservation meant slow death. The Mexican border meant quick death. Towns meant jail or worse. "You could stay," Ethan heard himself say. The women all stopped their work, looked at him. "Winter's not done. Nina can't travel, and I—" He paused, unused to admitting need. "I have more work than one man can handle. The fence needs mending. Roof needs patching before the spring storms. I could use the help." "We have no money," Mira said flatly. "Don't want money. Want the work done. Food and shelter for labor. Simple trade." Ayana stepped closer. "And when spring comes, when Nina is healed, when your fence is mended, then we see what happens." "That's not an answer." "It's the only honest answer I have." She considered this. "You know what people will say. A white man housing 5 Apache women. People have been talking about me for 6 years. Never cared before. This is different. This could bring trouble to your door. Trouble's already been to my door. I survived it." Halona spoke for the first time, her voice cultured, precise. "You're not what we expected." "What did you expect? A man who would see opportunity or a man who would see duty? You see neither." "What do I see then?" She smiled slightly. "People." That afternoon, Ethan showed them around the property. 10 acres of workable land, another 40 of forest and rock. A stream ran year-round from snowmelt. The shed could house 6 horses, though he only had 2. Root cellar was half empty but had potential. "It's a good land," Chenoa said, kneeling to touch the soil. "Things could grow here." "Never tried. Always seemed like too much work for one person." "Not for 6. Ayana said. "They spent the evening planning. Not grand plans. Survival didn't allow for those, but small ones. Where to reinforce the fence first, how to expand the garden plot, which herbs Chenoa could cultivate that would survive the altitude. Nina woke fully as the sun set, weak but lucid. She ate the broth Mira made, listened to the conversation, then looked at Ethan. "My mother said you had kind eyes." She was right. Your mother was generous with her assessment. No, she was careful with truth. Said most white men had eyes like winter, cold and patient. Yours are different. Different how? Nina smiled young despite everything. Like autumn, things dying and being born at the same time. That night, after the women had bedded down near the fire, Ethan sat in his chair by the window rifle across his lap, out of habit, more than concern. Ayanna approached, handed him coffee. "Can't sleep." "Haven't slept well in years," she admitted. "Always listening for horses, for shots, for screaming. Gets easier." "Does it?" He thought about lying, decided against it. "No, but you learn to function without it." She sat on the floor near his feet, not touching, but close. "Why did you really ask us to stay?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. 6 years ago, I made a choice. Saved one family, let dozens die. Been living with that arithmetic ever since. Maybe this is a chance to balance the books a little. We're not a debt to be paid. No, you're not. He looked down at her. But you're something. Just not sure what yet. She reached up, touched his hand where it rested on the rifle. Just for a moment, just enough to say she understood. We'll earn our keep. I know you will. And we'll protect what needs protecting. He turned his hand, caught her fingers briefly. So will I. They sat like that as the fire died low. Two damaged people in a damaged land building something that wasn't quite hope, but was no longer despair. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, covering their presence with nature's own silence. Tomorrow would bring work and worry, but tonight, for the first time in years, neither of them felt entirely alone. The nightmares came for Ethan on the third night. They always did when his guard dropped, when exhaustion finally won over vigilance. But this time, someone was there to witness them. He woke to Ayanna's hand on his shoulder, her voice cutting through the phantom gunfire. "Ethan, you're here. You're safe." He sat up, sweat cold on his skin, hands shaking. The cabin was dark except for embers in the stove. The other women slept on, accustomed to night terrors that weren't their own. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake anyone." "You didn't. I was up." She sat beside him on the floor, back against the wall. "Fort Grant, among other places. Tell me." It wasn't a request. Her tone carried the weight of someone who knew that untold stories festered like untreated wounds. "You don't want to hear it. I've lived it from the other side. Try me." Ethan rubbed his face, looked at her in the dim light. "I enlisted at 18. Thought I was going to be a hero. Protect settlers, keep the peace. They put me with translation duty because I had an ear for languages. Learned Apache from a scout named Joseph. Good man. They hung him 2 years later for teaching me too well." Ayanna said nothing, just waited. Fort Grant was supposed to be a peace meeting. Chiefs coming to negotiate winter rations. Army knew the Apache were starving, figured empty bellies would make for agreeable terms. But some settlers had lost cattle, blamed the Apache. Brennan, he was a corporal then, he got the men worked up. Said we should teach them a lesson. His voice went flat, reporters' distance from memory's pain. The chiefs came unarmed, brought their families to show good faith. Women, children, elders. Brennan gave the order to surround them. Said they were reaching for weapons. There were no weapons. I tried to translate to explain, but he hit me with his rifle butt. Told me to shut up or join them. But you didn't shut up. No. I stepped between his gun and a mother holding her baby. Salali. Nina's mother. Brennan shot me instead. Shoulder clean through. The sound made the other soldiers hesitate long enough for some families to run. Saved maybe a dozen. 43 died. They court-martialed you for that. for insubordination, for cowardice, for conduct unbecoming. Take your pick. Brennan testified I'd been collaborating with hostiles. 3 months in military prison, then discharged without honor. They let me go because keeping me meant paperwork about what really happened. Ayanna was quiet for a moment. And you came here. As far from uniforms as I could get. Thought if I disappeared deep enough, the memories would stop following. Did they? No. They just got quieter. Until now. Because we're here. Because you're here and Brennan's out there. Because I know what he does to Apache women when no one's watching. Because I failed to stop him once. Ayanna shifted closer. You didn't fail. Nina is alive because of you. Her mother lived 6 more years because of you. That's not failure. Tell that to the 43 who didn't. She touched his face, turned it toward her. I tell it to the one who tried. They sat in silence until Ethan's breathing steadied. Then, unexpected, Ayanna began to speak. You want to know about wounds? I'll show you mine. My husband's name was Thomas. Takish in our language. He believed in peace so hard it killed him. Worked as a scout, translated for the army, taught them our trails. He thought knowledge would bring understanding. Understanding would bring respect. Her voice carried no bitterness, just weight. The day they hung him, they made me watch. Brennan was there. Said Thomas had been feeding information to hostiles. The real crime Thomas had reported Brennan for selling army supplies to miners. Brennan needed him silenced. Jesus. They didn't just hang him. They made him stand on a wagon for an hour, first noose around his neck, while Brennan read charges. False charges. Thomas looked at me the whole time. Never looked away. When they moved the wagon, he mouthed, "Be strong," in our language. Brennan saw it, thought it was a curse. Shot his body 3 times after he was already dead. Ethan's hands clenched. I ran that night. Blood between my legs from losing the baby. Brennan's men riding behind. Hid in a cave for 2 days, drinking snowmelt, eating nothing. Mira found me. She'd been wandering since Sibique Creek, collecting other widows, like gathering broken pottery, trying to make something whole from pieces. How do you stand it? The weight. By carrying it together, by refusing to let it crush us, by surviving when they want us dead. She looked at him. By finding people like you who remember we're human. From across the room, Mira's voice came soft. Since we're sharing ghost stories, might as well make it complete. She sat up, the others stirring too. Nina stayed lying down but turned to listen. My sons were 14, 12, and 9, Mira said. At Sibique Creek, the army said they were executing a medicine man for stirring rebellion. He was praying for rain. My boys were there to learn the prayers. When the shooting started, they ran. Cavalry rode them down like rabbits. The youngest, Paolo, they trampled him. Didn't even waste a bullet. Chinoa spoke next, her voice reed thin. My husband bred horses, beautiful ones, paints and buckskins. Army wanted them offered half their worth. He refused. Next morning they said he'd stolen their mounts. No trial, just rope and a tree. I found him with our horses standing guard around his body. They knew. Animals always know. Halona's cultured voice cut through. My husband invited them to dinner. Federal commissioners thought if they saw we lived like them, ate like them, prayed to their God, they'd treat us as equals. They shot him at his own table. Said he reached for a knife. He was carving a roast. I was in the kitchen, heard it all. They laughed after. One said, one less chief to negotiate with. Nina Young voice wavering. I remember hiding under my mother's skirt at Fort Grant. The blood was so warm when it hit us. Yours, Ethan. Your blood. Mother pressed her hand over my mouth to keep me from screaming. Later she showed me the scar on your shoulder when they brought you to the healer. Said to remember the one white man who bled for us. I drew your face in the dirt every night for a year so I wouldn't forget. The cabin fell silent, 6 people holding their separate sorrows in shared space. Finally, Ethan spoke. We're all walking wounded, every one of us carrying things that should have killed us. But we're here, breathing, together. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Ayanna said. Dawn was breaking, painting the mountains purple gold. One by one they rose, began the day's work. But something had shifted. The weight each carried was the same, but distributed now across broader shoulders. As Ethan helped Nina to the porch for fresh air, she touched his arm. My mother was right about one more thing. What's that? She said the man who saved us would need saving too someday. That's why I remembered your face. So I'd know you when we found you. You think you found me, not the other way around. Nina smiled, wise beyond her years. We found each other. That's how the spirits work. Later, while chopping wood, Ethan found himself working beside Ayanna. Their rhythm matched naturally her swing, following his, creating a steady percussion against the mountain silence. Brennan will come, she said between swings. I know. He's not just hunting Apache, he's hunting anyone who stood against him. I know that too. You could turn us out. Save yourself the trouble. Ethan stopped, looked at her straight. 6 years I've been dead inside, walking, breathing, but dead. You 5 show up, and suddenly I remember why living matters. Why standing for something matters. I'm not turning anyone out, even if it means facing him again. Especially then. I was alone before. I'm not now. Ayanna set down her axe, stepped close. Neither are we. She kissed him, then sudden and fierce tasting of coffee and determination. When she pulled back, her eyes held no apology. That's for the man you were, and the man you're becoming. That night, Ethan cleaned his rifles, all 3 of them, checked ammunition, sharpened knives. The women watched him prepare, understanding without explanation. Mira began making poultices. Chenoa gathered her medicinal herbs. Helona wrote something in careful script, folded it, sealed it with wax. What's that? Ethan asked. Our testimony, in case we don't survive to give it ourselves. We'll survive. Then it will make interesting reading later. Nina, stronger now, began singing softly in Apache, a war song, but also a love song, the kind sung before battles that might not have survivors. The others joined in, voices weaving together like smoke. Ethan listened, understanding enough to know they sang of courage, of choosing your ground, of dying free rather than living chained. When they finished, he spoke the only Apache phrase he knew perfectly, learned from Joseph before they hung him, Shinali Dasida. We stand together. Ayanna smiled, fierce and beautiful. Yes, we do. The revelation came on a morning when frost painted the windows like lace. Nina had been helping Ethan repair harnesses in the barn, her fingers steady, now the tremor of fever long gone. She worked quietly until she suddenly stopped, staring at a leather strap in her hands. This pattern, the braid work, my mother made this. Ethan looked closer. She was right. The distinctive weave, Apache, but with a Spanish influence, exactly like the ones he'd seen at Fort Grant. Found it at a trading post 3 years ago. Man said he got it from an estate sale. Estate? Nina's voice went hollow. Someone who died without family. Goods get sold to pay debts. Nina traced the pattern with one finger. Mother made 12 of these, wedding gifts for my father's family. They were supposed to bind our families together. Instead, she didn't finish. Ethan watched, understanding dawn on her face. Your father's family, they were Spanish landowners. Yes, they disowned him when he married Apache. After Fort Grant, after Mother ran, they must have claimed his things. Sold them. She looked up at him. You bought a piece of my history without knowing. Seems like things find their way to where they need to be. From the cabin, Ayanna called out, urgent, riders coming. Ethan grabbed his rifle, moved fast to the door. 2 horses picking their way up the trail, not rushing, not hiding. As they got closer, he recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Morrison from Silver Creek. The other was a woman, Apache features, but dressed in settler's clothing. Stay inside, Ethan told the women, but Ayanna stood beside him on the porch. Morrison stopped at the fence line, hands visible. Walker, been a while. Sheriff, what brings you up here? Concerned citizen. This is my wife, Sarah. Ethan's surprise must have shown. Morrison almost smiled. Yeah, I know. Not common, not popular, but legal. Sarah, this is Ethan Walker, the hermit I told you about. Sarah studied the cabin, saw Ayanna in the doorway. Something passed between the women, silent communication in a shared glance. You have guests, Sarah said. Not a question. I have help, hired for winter work. 5 Apache women, 1 young injured, recently burned out of their camp near Wolf Hollow. Ethan's hand tightened on the rifle. If you're here to... I'm here to warn you, Morrison interrupted. Jack Brennan's in town, asking questions. Says he's tracking stolen horses, but he's really hunting survivors. Claims he killed some Apache raiders 3 nights back. They weren't raiders, Ayanna said, stepping forward. They were widows. He burned us out for sport. Sarah dismounted, approached the porch. I know. My cousin was married to one of them. She didn't make it out. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Morrison spoke carefully. I can't stop Brennan legally. He's got federal papers, bounty hunter license, but I can make sure he follows the law while he's in my jurisdiction. Why would you? Ethan asked. Morrison glanced at his wife. Because 15 years ago, an Apache woman saved my life, pulled me from a flash flood when I was too drunk and stupid to save myself. Sarah's mother. Figured I owed a debt. Married Sarah, been paying it forward since. People know. Some. Most pretend not to. Easier that way. He looked at Ayanna. Brennan doesn't know you're here. Yet. But he's thorough. He'll check every homestead eventually. Then we should leave, Ayanna said. No. Sarah's voice was firm. Running makes you prey. Standing makes you people with rights. We're Apache. We don't have rights. You do if you're documented properly. Morrison pulled out papers. Employment contracts, residence permits, all legal, all backdated to before the raid. According to these, you've been working for Walker for 2 months. Ethan examined the papers. These are real as law gets out here. Sarah's idea. She knows the clerk got them filed quiet-like. Sarah addressed Ayanna directly in Apache. Ethan caught most of it. Sister, we survive by being smarter. Let the papers be your shield. Ayanna responded in kind. Papers didn't save my husband. No, but witnesses might save you. Morrison remounted. Brennan will probably come within the week. Be ready. Be legal. Be careful. As they turned to leave, Sarah looked back. There's going to be a barn raising at the Hendricks place next month. Would be good for folks to see you all there. Together. Normal-like. After they left, the women gathered in the main room. Helona examined the papers with her educated eye. These are expertly done. Better than most legal documents I've translated. But will they hold? Mira asked. Against legal challenge. Yes, against Brennan's bullets. That's different. Nina, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke. We're not running anymore. Everyone looked at her. I've been running since Fort Grant. We all have. Running from different things, but running all the same. Here now we stop. We stand. We fight if we must. You're young, Mira said gently. Young, but not wrong. Nina looked at each of them. Ethan bled for us when he didn't know us. Now we know each other. Now we're... She searched for the word family. Chosen family. Ayanna walked to Ethan. She's right, but this isn't your fight alone anymore. Never was alone. Just took me too long to realize it. That afternoon, they prepared differently. Not just for defense, but for life. Chenoa planted herbs in windowsill pots, discussing growing seasons with Ethan as if next year was certain. Helona began teaching Nina to write in English, scratching letters on slate. Mira mended clothes, humming an old song. But it was that evening when everything shifted fundamentally. Ayanna found Ethan on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains red. She sat beside him closer than before. Sarah was right about being seen as normal. People fear what they don't understand. What are you saying? I'm saying that a single man housing 5 women raises questions. A married man with family doesn't. Ethan turned to look at her. Ayanna, I'm not proposing. I'm being practical. A legal marriage protects everyone, makes the other women family by law, not just employment. You'd marry for protection. I've done worse for less." She paused. "But that's not the only reason." "What's the other reason?" She looked at him directly. "Because when you sleep, you call my name. Because when I wake scared, I look for you first. Because something that started as shelter has become something else." "What has it become?" "Home. You've become home." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My mother used to say, home isn't a place, it's a choice you make every morning." "Smart woman." "She was Apache." Ayanna's eyes widened. "What? Half? Never told anyone after she died. Easier to pass as white. Safer. But she taught me the language in secret. Said someday I'd need it." "That's why you stood at Fort Grant. Not for strangers. For family. For what was right, but yes, also for family. For her memory." Ayanna kissed him, then soft and certain. "Then we're already family. The ceremony would just be paperwork." From inside, Nina's voice called out, "If you two are done pretending we can't hear you, dinner's ready." They went inside to find the others had prepared a feast from their limited supplies. Stew rich with herbs. Chenoa had found bread. Mira had baked even a dessert of preserved berries Helona had discovered in the cellar. "What's this for?" Ethan asked. "For choosing," Mira said simply. "All of us. For choosing to stop running." They ate together, really together, for the first time. Not survivors sharing space, but family sharing life. Stories were told. Mira described her son's laughter. Chenoa sang a song her husband wrote about horses. Helona recited poetry in 3 languages. Nina told the story of Fort Grant from her perspective, making Ethan sound like a giant who stepped out of legend. "I wasn't that heroic." "You were to a little girl under her mother's skirt." As the evening deepened, Ayanna stood. "Ethan has something to tell you all." He looked at her surprised. "About your mother," she prompted. He understood. Truth for truth. If they were choosing family, they deserved to know. "My mother was half Apache. Hidden. But it's why I learned the language. Why I stood at Fort Grant. Why having you here feels like she's still here somehow." The room was quiet. Then Mira spoke. "So you're not white savior. You're mixed blood finding his way home." "Something like that." "Good," Chenoa said. "Pure anything is weak. Mixed is strong, like good steel." That night, as they prepared for sleep, Nina approached Ethan. "The pattern on the harness. It means threads binding. Mother made them to bind families, but they ended up in your hands. Now we're here. Don't you see the spirits have been weaving this for years? You believe that I believe we found each other for a reason. All of us. At exactly the right time." She hugged him quick and fierce, then retreated to her bedroll. Ayanna appeared beside him. "She's right, you know, about the timing." "How do you figure?" "Because a year ago I would have been too angry to trust. A year from now might have been too broken to try. But now is exactly when we both needed to find each other. All of us. All of us." They stood together in the doorway, looking out at stars sharp as glass in the clear mountain air. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Brennan would come. The town would talk. The world would test them. But tonight, 6 broken people had chosen to become whole together, not by forgetting their wounds, but by sharing them. Not by erasing their pasts, but by weaving them into something stronger. "When?" Ethan asked quietly. "When what?" "When do we make it legal?" "The marriage." Ayanna smiled. "Before Brennan comes. Let him find a family, not fugitives." "Day after tomorrow, then. Sheriff Morrison can officiate. And the others can witness. Our chosen family. Our real family." Inside the fire crackled. Outside the wind sang through pines. And somewhere between the 2 sick souls who had been scattered by violence found themselves gathered by choice, bound by something stronger than blood or law or paper. They had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and clear, the kind of day where breath turned to frost and the mountains stood sharp against an endless sky. Ethan woke before sunrise, found Ayanna already awake standing by the window. Second thoughts, she turned to him. Third and fourth thoughts, but the first thought keeps winning. What's the first thought? That this is right. Maybe not conventional, maybe not what either of us planned, but right. They'd sent word to Sheriff Morrison the day before. He'd arrive by noon with the necessary papers. The ceremony would be simple legal binding. But first, there were preparations, and those preparations revealed more than any vows could. Mira had been up since before dawn baking bread with the last of their good flour. A wedding needs feast, she'd declared, brooking no argument. Even a practical wedding. Chenoa had gathered pine boughs and winter berries, decorating the cabin with subtle touches of color against the weathered wood. Beauty matters, she said when Ethan protested it wasn't necessary. Especially when life is hard, that's when beauty matters most. Helona sat at the table, carefully writing something in elegant script. When Ethan looked over her shoulder, he saw she was creating a marriage certificate of her own in Apache English and Spanish. The legal one is for them, she explained, meaning the outside world. This one is for us. For truth. Nina was the most animated he'd seen her since arrival. She'd insisted on making Ayanna ready, braiding her hair with colored thread she'd been saving. From my mother's wedding dress, she explained. The only piece I saved. She would want this. Would want you to have it. Ayanna's eyes glistened but didn't spill. Nina, I can't. You can. You will. You're giving us family again. This is small return. As noon approached, Ethan found himself unexpectedly nervous. He'd faced cavalry charges with less anxiety. Mira noticed brought him coffee laced with something stronger. Liquid courage. Liquid clarity, she corrected. You're not nervous about marrying her. You're nervous about being happy, about believing this can last. Can it? Mira's weathered face softened slightly. Nothing lasts forever, but some things last long enough to matter. This matters. Sheriff Morrison arrived with his wife Sarah, and surprisingly 2 other couples from town. The Hendricks, whose barn raising Sarah had mentioned, and the Clearys, an older couple who ran the general store. Witnesses, Morrison explained. Legal needs too, but Sarah thought you might want more. People who'll speak for you if questions arise. Mrs. Cleary, a stern woman Ethan had barely spoken to in 6 years of trading, approached him. Walker, I'll speak plain. Town's been talking about you having Apache women here. Some talk's ugly. But Sarah Morrison told us the truth of it, and my husband and I respect a man who stands by his principles. We're here to show that respect. Mr. Hendricks, younger eager, added, plus, anyone who gets Jake Morrison to ride up a mountain in winter must be worth knowing better. The ceremony itself was brief. They gathered in the main room, the fire crackling sunlight streaming through windows Chenoa had cleaned until they sparkled. Ayanna wore her same deerskin dress but cleaned, mended, and decorated with Chenoa's winter berries. She looked like something wild that had chosen to be momentarily tame. Morrison read the legal words, but it was Helona's translation into Apache that seemed to carry weight. When he asked for objections, the silence was profound, but warm. Do you, Ethan Walker, take this woman as your legal wife? I do. His voice was steady, certain. Do you, Ayanna, take this man as your legal husband? She looked at Ethan, then at the women who'd become her sisters, then back to him. I take all of this. The man, the place, the people, the purpose. I do. Morrison smiled slightly. Not quite the traditional response, but I'll accept it. When they kissed, it was brief, appropriate for public witness, but Ethan felt the promise in it. This wasn't just legal protection. This was choosing to build something together. After, as they signed papers, Mrs. Cleary surprised everyone by producing a cake from her wagon. Been 30 years since I made a wedding cake. Figured I was due. They ate in the cabin and spilled onto the porch, an unlikely gathering of Apache and white established and outcast, all bound temporarily by the simple act of witnessing love. Mr. Hendricks raised a glass of Mira's pine needle tea. To unexpected families. To choosing your people, Sarah Morrison added, looking meaningfully at her husband. To standing ground, Mira said firmly. To new beginnings from old endings, Helona offered. To finding home, Nina said softly. To surviving together, what we couldn't survive alone, Chenoa finished. As the town folks prepared to leave, Mrs. Cleary pulled Ayanna aside. Girl, I know what people will say, have been saying, but I've watched Walker for 6 years, never seen him look at anything the way he looks at you. That's not convenience. That's not protection. That's something else. What would you call it? The older woman considered. Recognition, like two pieces of something broken finally finding their match. After the guests left, the cabin felt different, fuller somehow, despite having fewer people. The women had tactfully given Ethan and Ayanna space, busying themselves with clearing dishes and tending the fire. That evening, as darkness settled over the mountains, Ethan and Ayanna walked to the grove behind the cabin. The trees stood like sentinels, heavy with snow. Your mother, Ayanna said suddenly. Tell me about her. The Apache part she hid. Ethan had rarely spoken of this, but the words came easier now. Her name was Maria, but her Apache name was Bemisi. It means slippery. She could slide between worlds, be what she needed to be. White when it was safe, Apache when it was necessary. Must have been lonely. She said the loneliest people are those who can't be themselves. That's why she taught me the language in secret. Said, even if I never used it, knowing it would mean I knew her fully. Do you think she would approve of this, of marrying an Apache woman to protect her and her sisters? Of marrying an Apache woman because you love her? Ethan stopped walking, turned to face her. Is that what this is? You tell me. Is this convenience wearing the mask of affection, or affection wearing the mask of convenience? He touched her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. My mother would say that love is just choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, and staying gets easier when you're staying for the right person. Am I the right person? You're the only person who's made me want to be better than what I've been. They kissed there in the grove longer than before, deeper. When they parted, Ayanna whispered, we should tell them the truth. Which truth? That this isn't just protection, that we choose each other regardless of Brennan or the law or anything else. They returned to find the women arranged around the fire, waiting. Nina spoke first. We have something to say. Ethan and Ayanna sat listening. Mira began, we've been talking about what this means, this marriage, this choice you've both made. Chenoa continued, you've given us legal protection, yes, but more than that. Helona added, you've given us dignity, the right to exist without running. Nina, youngest but perhaps wisest, concluded, so we want to give something back. Our loyalty, not as employees or dependents, but as family. True family. She produced a leather cord braided with 5 distinct patterns. Each of us added our mark. In our tradition, this binds us, not to serve, but to stand together. Ayanna's breath caught. That's a war bond. It means if one fights, all fight. If one falls, all carry them. If one triumphs, all triumph. Mira's voice was grave. We know what it means. Ethan looked at each woman. This is more than I asked for, more than I deserve. No, Helona said firmly. It's exactly what you deserve. A man who stands alone falls alone. A man who stands with family stands forever. The others completed in unison, obviously a saying they knew well. That night, as the fire died to embers, Ethan and Ayanna lay together in his bed for the first time as husband and wife. Not for passion, though that was there, but for the profound intimacy of chosen connection. Are you afraid? She whispered in the darkness. Of Brennan, no. Of this, of us, of hope. He pulled her closer, terrified, but terror feels better than numbness. Fear means something matters. We matter. Yes, we do. Outside, snow began to fall, again soft and silent. But inside, 6 people who had been broken by the world's cruelty had chosen to build something the world couldn't break. Not because they were strong, but because they were together. The marriage certificate, both legal and traditional, hung on the wall where all could see. But the real bond, the leather cord with 5 patterns Ayanna wore around her wrist. A reminder that choices, not circumstances, create family. And somewhere in the distance, riding through the same falling snow, Jack Brennan was coming. But he would find more than he bargained for. He would find people who had chosen to stop running, stop hiding, stop being victims. He would find a family ready to fight for their right to exist. The choice had been made. Now came the living with it. The first week after the marriage brought changes both subtle and profound. The cabin, once a shelter, began its transformation into a home. It started with small things: quinoa hanging, dried herbs from the rafters, their scent mixing with wood smoke to create something entirely new. Mira rearranging the furniture to create a communal space around the fire. Helona setting up a corner for teaching slate and chalk, ready for lessons. But it was Nina who made the first permanent mark. She'd found clay by the stream, gray-white and smooth, perfect for working. Her small hands shaped it into tiles, each one pressed with a different pattern. Apache designs mixed with something uniquely hers. She fired them in the coals overnight, and come morning began setting them into the threshold. Why there? Ethan asked, watching her work. Because every threshold is a choice. Every time we cross, we choose to enter or leave. This way, we choose consciously. Ayanna knelt beside the girl, helping to set the tiles in place. Your mother would be proud. You're making art from earth beauty, from necessity. Mother said survival without beauty is just existing. We're done with just existing. The daily routine that emerged felt natural, unforced. Mornings began before dawn with Ethan and Ayanna checking the trap lines together. She moved through snow, silent as shadow, teaching him Apache tracking methods he'd never learned. You walk like a soldier still, she observed. Heavy, straight, announcing yourself. How should I walk? Like the deer. Light, indirect part of the landscape rather than imposed upon it. He tried to match her footsteps, failed, tried again. She didn't laugh, just adjusted his posture with gentle hands. Better, in a month, you'll move like us. Like Apache. Like someone who belongs to the land rather than claiming it. Mid-mornings found the cabin busy with industry. Mira had taken over the cooking, entirely transforming their meager supplies into meals that somehow tasted like abundance. She taught Ethan recipes his mother might have known but never could share. Pine needle tea for strength, juniper berries for cleansing, rose hips for preventing sickness. Your people call it frontier medicine. We call it grandmother's wisdom. Quinoa worked her plant medicine, creating tinctures and salves. She'd found a protected spot behind the cabin where sun reflected off the rock face, creating a microclimate warm enough for hardy herbs. Her hands working the soil seemed to wake something in the earth itself. This land has been sleeping, she told Ethan, waiting for someone to ask it to give rather than demanding its surrender. I never thought to ask. No, you thought to hide. The land knew. It kept its gifts hidden too. Helona established her teaching corner, working with Nina on languages, but also on something deeper. History. Not the version taught in white schools or Apache tradition alone, but something between. The true story of the borderlands. Write this down, she instructed Nina. December 1882, 6 people chose to become family, not by blood or force or law alone, but by decision. This is how new peoples are born. Is that what we are? A new people. We are what happens when the old categories fail. Apache, white, widow, hermit. These words mean nothing here. We need new words. What words? Helona smiled. We'll invent them as we go. The afternoons brought shared labor. Everyone worked, but not in the grinding way of mere survival. There was rhythm to it, almost music. Ethan and Ayanna expanded the fence line, while Mira and Chenoa reinforced the chicken coop they'd discovered half collapsed behind the shed. Nina and Helona cataloged supplies, creating inventory with careful precision. It was during one such afternoon that the first test came. 3 riders appeared on the ridge. Not Brennan. Ethan would have recognized his posture anywhere. These were locals, the Colby brothers who ran cattle on the lower slopes. They'd had disputes with Ethan before about water rights, fence lines, the usual frontier friction. Walker, the eldest Samuel, called from the gate. Heard you got yourself married. Ethan approached, rifle visible but not raised. Ayanna appeared on the porch, the other women behind her. I did. Samuel's eyes traveled over the women, lingering too long on Ayanna. Apache wives, all of them. My wife and her sisters. Here legally, working legally, living legally. Legal. The word dripped contempt. That what you call it? The middle brother David spoke up. Sam, leave it. Man's business is his own. But the youngest Pete, barely 20, and eager to prove himself, sneered. Bet they're real grateful, real accommodating. That why you took them in, Walker, getting what the army used to take for free. The silence that followed was dangerous. Ethan's hand moved toward his rifle, but Ayanna stepped forward. You're Pete Colby. Her English was clear controlled. You lost 30 head last winter, blamed wolves. But wolves don't leave whiskey bottles at kill sites. Pete's face reddened. What are you saying? I'm saying men who drink while watching cattle shouldn't throw accusations at others. I'm saying your brother David had to pay off your gambling debts to keep you from being shot in Silver Creek. I'm saying Samuel's wife left him not because she was visiting family, but because he hits her when he drinks. How could you know? We listen. We watch. We survive by knowing what men around us are capable of. She stepped closer to the fence. So here's what you need to know. We are here legally. We work honestly. We threaten nothing of yours. But if you come here again with insults and implications, you'll find Apache women know more about your business than you'd like shared in town. Samuel's face had gone pale. You threatening us? Ethan spoke then. No threats, just clarity. We want to live in peace, but peace requires respect. You don't have to like us, but you will leave us be. David, the sensible middle brother, touched Samuel's arm. Come on, we've got cattle to tend. As they turned to leave, Pete couldn't resist one last shot. Brennan's coming. He'll sort this out proper. After they left, Ethan found his hands shaking. Not from fear, but from rage he'd thought he'd buried. How did you know those things? He asked Ayanna. Sarah Morrison. She hears everything in town, shares what might be useful. Information is armor for people like us. That evening, the cabin felt smaller, the world outside larger and more hostile. They ate quietly until Nina suddenly stood. We need to make this place ours. Really ours. Not just surviving here, but claiming it. How? Mira asked. Nina walked to the wall, ran her fingers along the bare wood. Stories. In our tradition, a home holds stories. They protect it, strengthen it. We should mark our stories here. Over the following days, that's what they did. Not with paint or obvious decoration that might draw attention, but with subtle marks, careful carvings, hidden beauty. Chenoa etched medicinal plants into the window frames, guides for future gathering, but also art. Mira carved her sons' names into the underside of the table where her hands could find them during meals. Helona inscribed poetry in 3 languages along the door frame, too small to read unless you knew to look. Ayanna and Ethan worked together on something larger. Using charcoal and ochre, Chenoa had found they created a map on the cabin's north wall, not just of the land, but of their journeys to reach it. Ethan's path from Fort Grant, Ayanna's flight from her husband's hanging tree, the routes that brought each woman to this place. lines converging like rivers, meeting, forming something larger than their individual streams. "It's beautiful," Nina breathed when they finished. "It's us," Ayanna corrected. "All of us, where we've been and where we are now." The work on the cabin continued. They chinked gaps between logs with a mixture of clay and straw, rehung the door to swing smoother, built shutters that could close tight against winter storms or summer heat. Each improvement was small, but together they transformed the space. One morning, Ethan woke to find Ayanna already upstanding naked at the wash basin sunrise, painting her skin gold and copper. The scars on her back, which he'd noticed but never mentioned, seemed like part of her beauty, rather than despite it. She noticed him watching in the small mirror. "My husband gave me those. Before Thomas. My first husband, the one my family chose. He believed women should be silent." "What happened to him?" "Apaches raided his ranch. I could have warned him. I chose silence." She turned to face him, no shame in her nudity or her admission. "Does that change how you see me?" "It tells me you're a survivor. I already knew that." She came back to bed, her skin cool against his warmth. "We're building something here, all of us, something that hasn't existed before." "What would you call it?" "I don't know yet, but I know it's worth protecting." That afternoon, unexpected visitors arrived, the Hendricks with their 2 young children. Mrs. Hendricks carried a basket Mr. Hendricks' tools. "Heard you were making improvements," he said simply. "Thought you might need help with the roof. Noticed it sagging when we were here for the wedding." It was an excuse Ethan knew, a reason to show support without stating it plainly. He accepted the fiction gratefully. The children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, stared at the Apache women with frank curiosity rather than fear. Nina knelt to their level, began telling them a story about rabbits and coyotes. Soon, they were laughing, cultural boundaries forgotten in the universal language of storytelling. Mrs. Hendricks worked alongside Mira in the kitchen, sharing recipes, comparing techniques. No profound statements about unity, just 2 women cooking together, finding common ground and feeding families. As Mr. Hendricks and Ethan repaired the roof, the man spoke quietly. "Colby brothers are talking in town. Ugly stuff, but more folks are pushing back than you'd expect. Morrison's wife has been instrumental. She reminds people that Apache trade kept the early settlements alive, that forgetting that is choosing ignorance. Still, Brennan's coming." "Yes, but he'll find more resistance than he expects. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about what kind of place Silver Creek wants to be." That evening, after the Hendricks left the cabin, felt different. Not just improved structurally, but validated somehow. They were no longer completely isolated. Threads of connection were forming, fragile but real. As they prepared for sleep, Ayanna performed a ritual Ethan hadn't seen before. She took a coal from the fire, crushed it to powder, mixed it with water. Then she drew symbols on the door frame, the window sills, the threshold. "Protection marks," Ethan asked. "Memory marks, so the cabin remembers us. So if we're driven out or killed, something of us remains." "We're not going to be driven out." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much to believe in certainties. "Perhaps not, but the marks remain either way. Witness to what we're building. Evidence that Apache and White and everything between can create rather than destroy." That night, as snow began to fall again, 6 people slept in a cabin that had become more than shelter. They had made it a home through work and art, through shared meals and shared stories, through the simple daily act of choosing to build rather than merely survive. Outside, the world might be hostile. Brennan might be coming. The town might be divided. But inside, they were creating something new. A way of living that didn't require choosing sides, but rather creating a new side altogether. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't permanent, but it was theirs. And they would defend it with everything they had. The barn raising at the Hendricks place changed everything. It was the 3rd week of January. The weather had broken temporarily, and half of Silver Creek had gathered to help rebuild after a December storm. Ethan hadn't wanted to go, but Ayanna insisted. We hide, we remain outsiders, we show ourselves, we become neighbors. They arrived as a group, all 6 of them in the wagon. The conversation stopped when they pulled up, 40 people suddenly silent watching. Then Mrs. Hendricks broke the spell, walking over with deliberate warmth. Ayanna, so glad you could come. We need all the hands we can get. The division was immediate and visible. About a third of the crowd followed Mrs. Hendricks' lead, greeting them normally. Another third stayed distant but not hostile. The final third, led by the Colby brothers, made their displeasure known through glares and muttered comments. But work has a way of breaking down barriers. Ethan joined the men raising beams. His strength, his knowledge of construction earned grudging respect. When a support beam started to slip, threatening to crush young Pete Colby, it was Ethan who threw himself forward, taking the weight, while others scrambled to secure it. Pete Shaken managed a quiet thanks. Anyone would have done it. No, Pete said, looking him in the eye for the first time. They wouldn't. Meanwhile, the women had integrated themselves into the food preparation. Mira's bread, baked that morning and brought as contribution, disappeared quickly with multiple requests for the recipe. Chenoa quietly treated Mrs. Patterson's burned hand with a salve, earning the older woman's tearful gratitude. Helona helped the schoolteacher, Miss Curtis, organize the children into games, her patience with them evident. But it was Nina who created the moment that shifted everything. The Cleary's grandson Timothy, 6 years old and born with a twisted foot, sat alone watching the other children play. Nina approached, sat beside him. I was injured too, she said simply. Couldn't walk right for weeks. Did it hurt? Every day. But pain is just your body telling you it's still fighting. She began telling him a story half in English, half in Apache, about a young eagle with a broken wing who learned to hunt from the ground until he could fly again. Other children gathered, drawn by her voice. Soon she had a dozen of them, white and Mexican, and the one other Apache child, all listening with rapt attention. Mrs. Cleary watched with tears in her eyes. That girl has a gift. Ayanna, working beside her, nodded. She survived by remembering beauty exists. Now she shares it. How old is she? 17. Old enough to have lost everything. Young enough to believe in building again. As the sun reached its peak, lunch was served. The careful segregation of the morning had begun to blur. Ethan found himself talking with James Patterson the blacksmith about improving his plow design. Ayanna was deep in conversation with several women about preserving meat through winter. Then Sheriff Morrison arrived with news that shattered the fragile peace. Brennan's in town. Came in this morning with 4 men. They're asking questions. The crowd went quiet. Everyone knew who Brennan was, what he represented. Morrison continued. He's got federal papers bounty hunter license. Says he's tracking Apache raiders who killed settlers near Fort Bowie. That's 300 miles from here, someone protested. Distance doesn't matter to men like Brennan. He goes where the money leads. Samuel Colby spoke up. Well, if he's looking for Apaches. His eyes went to Ayanna and the others. He's looking for raiders. Morrison cut him off. These women are documented residents, legal workers. My wife has verified their papers personally. Papers. Samuel spit. Since when do papers matter to Brennan? Since I'm the law in this town, Morrison's voice carried steel. Anyone, including Brennan, who violates that law will answer to me. The crowd dispersed into smaller groups discussing. Ethan noticed the divisions weren't as clear as before. Some who'd been hostile seemed thoughtful. Others who'd been neutral were taking sides. Mr. Hendricks climbed onto a wagon bed, called for attention. We've got a barn to raise. That's what we came for. Everything else can wait. Work resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. When the frame was complete and the walls begun, something unexpected happened. Old Miguel Santos, the Mexican rancher who rarely spoke to anyone, approached Ethan. Your woman, she helped my wife during the blood sickness last year. Didn't know she was Apache then. Doesn't matter. Help is help. If Brennan comes for them, he comes through me too. One by one, others made similar declarations. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. A coalition of the grateful, the principled, and the practical understanding that Brennan's brand of justice threatened everyone eventually. As evening approached and the barn stood complete, Pastor Williams, who'd been notably silent all day, asked for attention. "I've been wrestling with my conscience," he began. "The Bible says to welcome strangers, for we might entertain angels unaware. It also speaks of good Samaritans, those who help regardless of tribe or tradition. I look at these women, see how they work, how they contribute, how they care for each other and for us, and I see Christianity in action regardless of what they call their God." He looked directly at Ayanna. "You're welcome at Sunday services, all of you. Front pew if you want it." The ride home was quiet, each person processing the day differently. As they neared the cabin, they saw smoke rising from the chimney. Ethan pulled up sharp, reached for his rifle. "I banked the fire this morning." They approached carefully. The door was open. Inside, sitting at their table, was Jack Brennan. He stood slowly theatrical in his movements. Older than Ethan remembered, but harder too. Years of hunting humans had carved something cruel into his features. "Walker, been a long time." "Not long enough." Brennan's eyes traveled over the women, lingered on Ayanna. "These the Apache whores you're keeping, my wife and her sisters, in my home, which you've entered without permission." "Federal authority gives me permission." He pulled out papers, tossed them on the table. "Tracking 5 Apache women, killed 3 settlers near Fort Bowie, tortured them first, cut off things men value. These women have been here for months. Documented. Check with Sheriff Morrison." "Morrison," Brennan laughed. "The Apache lover. His word means nothing." He walked closer to Ayanna, who didn't retreat. "You look familiar. Do I know you? All Apache women look the same to men like you." His hand moved fast, grabbed her chin, forced her face up. Ethan's rifle was in his hands before he thought, "Let her go. Or what, you'll shoot a federal agent again." "I'll shoot an intruder threatening my wife." Brennan released. Ayanna stepped back. "Wife, that's what you call it." He looked around the cabin, taking in the decorations, the signs of home. "Cozy. But then you always were soft on savages." "Get out." "I'm going. But I'll be back. With warrants. With men. With whatever it takes." He stopped at the door. "Fort Grant was a mistake, Walker. You chose the wrong side. You're making the same mistake again." "No. At Fort Grant, I was alone. This time, I'm not." Brennan laughed. "You think this town will stand for you against federal authority, against me? I think you'll find out." After he left, they barricaded the door, checked windows, prepared for siege. But Ayanna stopped the frantic preparations. "No, we don't hide. We don't cower. Tomorrow is Sunday. We go to church like the pastor invited. We show the town we're not afraid." "That's dangerous," Mira protested. "Everything is dangerous, but visible courage is better than hidden fear." That night, no one slept well. They took turns watching. Near dawn, Ethan heard horses, multiple riders moving fast. He woke the others' weapons ready. But it wasn't Brennan. It was Morrison with a dozen men from town. The Hendricks, Miguel Santos, even David Colby. Brennan's gathered men from the mining camps. Morrison explained. "Plans to come at noon. Claims you're harboring fugitives." "We should run," Chenoa said. "No," Morrison replied firmly. "You run, you're guilty forever. You stand with the town's support, you might win." "Why would the town support us?" Helona asked. David Colby answered, surprising everyone. "Because Brennan burned out a Mexican family last month. Said they were hiding Apache. They weren't. Because he shot 2 black freedmen, claimed they were helping raiders. They were just traveling through. Because if we let him take you, who's next?" The morning passed in preparation, not for battle, but for witness. The women dressed in their best. Ethan wore his only good shirt. They would meet Brennan not as fugitives, but as citizens. The church bell rang at 11. They walked down the main street of Silver Creek, the town watching. Some doors closed, others opened. By the time they reached the church, they had an escort of 20 people. Pastor Williams met them at the door. "Front pew like I promised." The service had just begun when Brennan arrived. He entered with 6 men, all armed. The congregation tensed. "Pastor, I need those women. This is a house of God. All are welcome. They're murderers. They're my congregants." Brennan moved down the aisle. Several men stood blocking his path. The Hendricks, Santos, Morrison, others. "Stand aside," Brennan ordered. "No." The voice was unexpected. Mrs. Cleary, 70 years old, 5 feet tall, stepped into the aisle. "You want them, you go through me." "Old woman, move. I've buried 2 husbands and 3 children. Death doesn't scare me, but injustice does. These women have done nothing but help this town. You're the threat here." Others stood. Not all, but enough. A wall of ordinary people between Brennan and his prey. Brennan's hand went to his gun. Morrison's went to his. "Federal authority," Brennan began. "Means nothing if you're dead," Morrison interrupted. "And if you draw that weapon in this church, that's what you'll be." The moment stretched taut. Then from the back, a new voice. Sarah Morrison, but speaking in Apache. Ayanna translated, "She says the federal marshal from Denver is coming. She wired him about Brennan's activities. He'll be here tomorrow to investigate complaints of overreach." Brennan's face darkened. "This isn't over." "No." Ethan stood faced him. "It's not. But today, in this place, with these witnesses, it is." Brennan left with his men. The church erupted in nervous conversation. Pastor Williams called for calm, then did something unexpected. He asked Ayanna to speak. She stood, looked at the congregation. "We came here as refugees. We stayed as workers. Now today, you've made us neighbors. We don't forget such gifts." That afternoon, the cabin filled with visitors. People brought food supplies support. The community that had been fractured was rebuilding itself around a new center. The idea that justice wasn't about race or tradition, but about character and contribution. Nina sat with the Cleary grandson, teaching him Apache words. Mira helped Mrs. Patterson with her burns. Chenoa and Miguel Santos discussed crop rotation. Helona and Miss Curtis planned a joint lesson for the school children. As the sun set, Ethan and Ayanna stood on the porch watching their unexpected guests mingle in their yard. "We did it," Ayanna said. "Did what made them see us as people. Not Apache, not other, just people. Brennan will be back." Yes, but now he faces a community, not just a family. That night, as the visitors departed and quiet returned, the 6 gathered around their fire. The leather cord with 5 patterns that bound them as family had been joined by something larger, threads of connection to a community that had chosen conscience over convention. They were still vulnerable. Brennan was still dangerous. The federal marshal might not help, but they were no longer alone. And in the American West of 1882, not being alone was the difference between surviving and living. The federal marshal never came. 3 days after the church confrontation, word arrived that he'd been redirected to troubles near Tucson. Brennan, meanwhile, had disappeared into the mining camps, gathering men and grievances like ammunition. The morning it all broke was deceptively peaceful. February 20th dawn, coming late and pale through frozen clouds. Ethan was in the barn, milking the goats with Nina. Ayanna and Mira were inside preparing breakfast. Chenoa was checking her herbs, worried about frost damage. Helona sat at the table writing in her journal. The first sign was the birds. Every crow, raven, and jay suddenly took flight, their cries sharp with alarm. Ethan stood, hand moving to the rifle, always within reach. "Nina, get to the house. Now." She didn't question, just ran. Ethan followed, scanning the tree line. Nothing visible, but the woods felt wrong. Too quiet after the birds' departure. He was halfway to the cabin when he saw them. not coming up the trail, but spread through the forest. At least a dozen men moving tactical surrounding them. "Brennan!" Ethan shouted. "Show yourself." The man emerged from behind the large pine, but he wasn't alone. Pete Colby was with him, along with men Ethan didn't recognize. Miners, drifters, the kind who'd hunt anything for money. "Walker, time to end this. End what we've done nothing wrong." "Wrong," Brennan laughed. "You're harboring fugitives, Apache raiders who killed 3 settlers. You have no proof because it never happened." "I have witnesses." He gestured to Pete Colby. "This man saw your women near Fort Bowie 2 weeks ago." Pete wouldn't meet Ethan's eyes. "Yeah, I saw them." "Pete, you were here 2 weeks ago, at the barn raising." "Must be mistaken about the date." Ethan understood. Brennan had bought or threatened Pete into lying. Legal testimony from a local would override any protection Morrison could offer. The cabin door opened. Ayanna stepped out of the other women behind her. All were armed, rifles, knives, even Chenoa with her skinning blade. "Ah," Brennan smiled. "Armed resistance. Even better. Men you see, they're threatening federal officers." "We're defending our home," Ayanna said clearly. "Your home." Brennan pulled out a paper. "This land is deeded to Ethan Walker. You're just squatters, trespassers. Unless Walker wants to claim you're his property, it was a trap. Either they were trespassers who could be removed, or they were property without rights." Brennan had thought this through, but Helona stepped forward, her own papers in hand. "We're neither. We're documented workers with legal residence, and I have here a transfer of partial deed filed last week. We own shares in this land." Brennan's face darkened. "Let me see that." "Come get it." The tension ratcheted higher. Men on both sides raised weapons. Then, unexpected, another voice from the woods. "Nobody moves." Sheriff Morrison emerged with 8 men. The Hendricks, Miguel Santos, David Colby, looking furious at his younger brother and others from town. "Morrison, this is federal business. This is my jurisdiction. Any arrests go through me." "Then arrest them." "On what charge?" "Pete's testimony. Pete, who was in my jail 2 weeks ago for drunk and disorderly. Hard to see Apache women at Fort Bowie from inside a cell in Silver Creek." Pete's lie crumbled. He stammered, I was confused." "You were paid," David Colby said flatly. "Or threatened." "Which was it, Pete?" Before Pete could answer, Brennan acted. His gun came up fast, aimed at Ayanna. "If I can't take them legal, I'll take them dead. Bounty pays either way." Everything happened at once. Ethan moved, throwing himself toward Ayanna. Morrison drew, shouting for Brennan to stop. Nina, young Nina, who'd been through so much, did something unexpected. She began to sing. It was the death song, the Apache warrior's last chant. But from her young voice, it became something else. Not acceptance of death, but defiance of it. The other women joined in, their voices rising in harmony that seemed to freeze everyone in place. Even Brennan hesitated. In that moment of suspension, nature intervened. The storm that had been building all morning broke with violence. Not snow, but ice driving horizontal, turning the world into a chaos of white and sting. Visibility dropped to nothing. Inside, Ethan shouted, grabbing Ayanna, pulling her toward the cabin. Gunfire erupted, but blind wild. Men shooting at shadows and sounds. Morrison's voice rose above it. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" The women made it inside. Ethan slammed the door, barred it. Through the windows, they could see nothing but white fury. The storm had become a wall between them and their attackers. "They'll wait it out," Mira said grimly. "Then come." "No." Ethan was already moving. "We use this." He knew this land in ways the attackers didn't. Every trail, every shelter, every danger. In this storm, that knowledge was power. "There's a ravine 20 yards north. In this ice, men who don't know it's there will fall. The old mine shaft 30 yards east, covered with rotted boards that look solid. The woods where the trees are diseased, ready to fall with weight. You're talking about killing them, Helona said. I'm talking about surviving. Ayanna touched his arm. Not alone. You can't. We're Apache. Storm and forest are our elements. She looked at the others. Who stands? Every hand rose. They prepared quickly. White sheets over their clothes for camouflage. Weapons chosen for silence. Knives, hatchets, Chenoa's herbs that could disorient. They knew they couldn't win a straight fight. But this wouldn't be straight. Ethan took point, leading them out to the back window. The storm swallowed them immediately. Ice cut exposed skin, made breathing painful, but it also covered sound, hid movement. They spread out, each taking a position. The plan was simple. Create chaos, make Brennan's men panic, turn them against the land itself. Nina, lightest and fastest, moved first. Her thrown rocks sounded like footsteps leading two men toward the ravine. Their screams when they fell were swallowed by wind. Chenoa used her herbs, creating smoke that mixed with ice, making men think they were surrounded by fire. Several fled toward the mine shaft. The crack of breaking boards was followed by silence. Mira Strong, despite her age, used a rope to pull diseased trees down across paths, creating barriers and crushing threats. Helona, precise and calculating, picked off stragglers with thrown knives, wounding, not killing, making them retreat. But it was Ayanna who went for Brennan himself. She found him trying to rally his remaining men near a rock outcrop. Through the storm, she could hear his voice. It's just weather. They're just women. She emerged from the white like a ghost, her knife finding his shoulder before he even saw her. He spun, fired wild. She was already gone. Face me, he screamed into the storm. She came from another angle blade, slicing across his gun hand. The weapon fell into snow. Now he saw her, really saw her. You, I remember you. Thomas's whore. I hung him, you know. Took my time. She didn't respond with words. Her attack was response enough. They fought in the ice storm, brutal and close. Brennan was bigger, stronger, but Ayanna had rage years in the making. He got his hands around her throat. She let him, then drove her knee up, using his closeness against him. As he doubled over, she spoke in his ear, "Thomas sends his regards." Her knife found his side deep, but not fatal. Not yet. Ethan appeared through the storm rifle raised. Enough, Ayanna. He killed my husband, and killing him makes you him. We're better than that. She hesitated, knife poised. Then Morrison's voice cut through everything. Federal Marshal, everyone stands down. Through the dying storm, a new group of riders appeared. At their head, a man in a long coat with a marshal's star. The real federal marshal finally arrived. What followed was swift. The marshal, a man named Harrison, had been investigating Brennan for months. Falsified bounties, murdered innocents, stolen federal funds. Pete Colby's confession, terrified and tearful, was the final evidence needed. Brennan was arrested, his men scattered or captured. As they led him away, bleeding but alive, he looked at Ayanna. This isn't over. Yes, she said simply. It is. The aftermath took hours. Statements given, wounded, tended dead, counted. 3 of Brennan's men had died in the storm and chaos. Several others were injured. Of the defenders, only minor wounds. Marshal Harrison interviewed everyone separately. When he came to Nina, she showed him something she'd kept hidden, a letter from her mother, written before she died, describing Fort Grant, naming Brennan as one of the killers, identifying Ethan as the soldier who saved them. This corroborates other testimonies, Harrison said. Brennan will hang for his crimes, all of them. As evening came, the storm fully passed. The cabin filled again with people from town. But this time it was different. They came not as supporters, but as friends. The shared danger had bonded them in a ways peace never could. Mrs. Cleary brought soup. Figured you'd be too tired to cook. Miguel Santos brought wood. Storm took some of your fence. We'll fix it tomorrow. Even Samuel Colby came shamefaced, pulling Pete by the ear. Boy's got something to say. Pete, looking like he'd aged years and hours, stammered an apology. I was scared. Brennan said he'd kill me if I didn't lie. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." It was Nina who answered. "Fear makes us all weak sometimes. Choose better next time." Late that night, after everyone had gone, the 6 sat around their fire, exhausted, wounded in small ways, but alive, together. "We could have run," Mira said. "When the storm came, we could have fled." "But we didn't," Halona observed. "We stood and fought. We protected what's ours," Chenoa added. Ethan looked at each of them, these women who'd arrived as refugees but had become warriors. "You saved me today, all of you." "We saved each other," Ayana corrected. "That's what family does." Nina, half asleep but still listening, murmured, "The spirits were right. We found each other just in time." "For what?" Ethan asked. "For becoming who we were meant to be." Outside, the night was clear stars, sharp as glass after the storm. The cabin stood solid, marked by violence, but not broken by it. Inside, 6 people who'd been forged by loss into something stronger sat in comfortable silence. They had faced the worst and survived. More than survived, they'd won. Not just against Brennan, but against the fear and prejudice he represented. Tomorrow would bring challenges, healing, rebuilding, continuing to prove they belonged. But tonight, they were safe. They were home. They were family. And that was victory enough. Spring came early that year, or perhaps it only seemed that way after the violence of winter. By March, the snow had retreated to the highest peaks, leaving the valley green and eager. The cabin, scarred from the battle, but standing strong, became a symbol of something larger than its inhabitants had intended. The trial of Jack Brennan took place in Denver. Ethan testified, as did Ayana and Sheriff Morrison. The courtroom was packed, the case having drawn attention from newspapers as far as San Francisco. When Brennan was sentenced to hang, Ayana felt nothing, not satisfaction, not relief. Just the quiet closing of a chapter written in blood. "I thought it would feel different," she told Ethan on the train ride home. "Like something lifting. Revenge never lifts anything. It just ends things. What lifts weight is what comes after." What came after was unexpected. They returned to find the cabin transformed. The community had worked in their absence. New windows, glass ones that caught morning light. The fence not just repaired, but expanded. A second room added to the north side. And in front, a painted sign, Walker Ranch, Esther 1882. Mrs. Hendricks explained, tears in her eyes. "It wasn't charity. It was investment in what you all represent. In the future, we want to build." The growing season that followed was unlike anything Ethan had experienced in his 6 years of solitude. The land, as Chenoa had predicted, had been waiting to give. With 6 people working it, understanding it, asking rather than demanding it, responded with abundance. Ayana's corn grew tall and strong. Chenoa's medicinal garden flourished, drawing people from town seeking remedies. Mira's vegetable plot produced enough to feed them and sell at market. Halona started a small school, teaching both Apache and white children together, despite initial resistance. Nina, healed fully now, became something of a bridge between worlds. Her youth, her story, her gift for language made her welcome everywhere. She spent mornings helping Ethan with ranch work, afternoons in town assisting Miss Curtis at the school, evenings teaching Apache stories to anyone who'd listen. It was Nina who brought the news that changed everything. "There's a group coming, Apache, about 20, women and children mostly. They heard about us, about a place where Apache and white live together in peace." Ethan's first instinct was fear. 20 more people would strain resources, draw attention, invite trouble. But Ayana saw opportunity. "We have land. We have water. We have proof it works. The town won't accept 20 more Apache." The town didn't accept 5 until they did. The debate lasted days. Mira worried about food supplies, Chenoa about medicine, Halona about legal complications, but it was Nina who settled it. "When I was under my mother's skirt at Fort Grant covered in Ethan's blood, I thought the world was ending. But it wasn't ending. It was changing. This is another change. We can fear it or shape it. They chose to shape it. The new arrivals came in May. Not 20, but 15, having lost some to the journey. They were led by an elderly woman named DeSoda, whose dignity remained intact despite her ragged clothes and hollow cheeks. "We heard stories," she said simply, "about a place where the old hatred doesn't rule. Is it true?" Ayanna answered by showing them the cabin, the gardens, the school, where Apache and white children learn together. "It's as true as we make it each day." The integration wasn't smooth. The town divided again, some threatening to drive out all the Apache, but something had changed since Brennan. The community had tasted what standing together felt like. When Samuel Colby tried to organize resistance, he found fewer followers than expected. It was Morrison who proposed the solution. They can't all live at Walker Ranch, but there's the old Paulson place abandoned for 3 years. Good land needs work. What if the town helped establish them there, not as charity, but as neighbors? The town meeting to decide lasted 5 hours. Voices were raised, fears aired, old prejudices battled new realities. In the end, it was Pastor Williams who swayed the vote. We can choose to be the town that welcomed the stranger, that wrote a new chapter in the story of Apache and White. Or we can choose to be another Fort Grant. I know which choice I'll face my maker with. The vote was close, but it passed. The work of establishing the new settlement became a community effort. Not everyone participated, but enough did. Ethan and his family became the bridge, teaching the new arrivals what they'd learned about working with, not against the town's fears. By midsummer, both settlements were thriving. Trade had developed. Apache crafts for town goods, traditional medicine for modern tools. Chinoa worked with Dr. Bryan, combining Apache and white medical knowledge. Halona's school grew, adding a second teacher. Nina started a youth group, mixing Apache and white teenagers in shared activities. But it was the 4th of July celebration that marked the true transformation. The town had always held a celebration, speeches, picnic fireworks if they could afford them. This year, Ayanna proposed something different. Let both communities contribute. Make it a real celebration of independence, all kinds of independence. There was resistance, of course, but Mrs. Hendricks, now the unofficial leader of the progressive faction, pushed it through. The day itself dawned perfect. Clear sky, warm but not hot, the mountains standing witness to something unprecedented. The Apache contributed traditional dances, food crafts for sale. The town provided music games, and Pastor Williams gave a speech about freedom that somehow encompassed everyone's struggles. But the moment that would be remembered, talked about for generations, came at sunset. Nina stood on the makeshift stage, 17 years old, but carrying the weight of history. She spoke in English, Apache, and Spanish, telling the story of Fort Grant, but not as accusation, as shared history. 43 died that day. Apache blood spilled on American soil, but one man stood against it, spilled his own blood to save who he could. That man stands here today, my brother by choice, Ethan Walker. She called him up. Reluctant, embarrassed, he stood beside her. This is what reconciliation looks like, Nina continued, not forgetting the past, but choosing a different future, not erasing differences, but celebrating them. We are Apache. They are white. Together we are something new. Together we are neighbors. The applause started slowly. Mrs. Cleary first, then the Hendricks, then spreading through the crowd. Not everyone. Some stood silent, arms crossed, but most clapped and some wept. That night, as fireworks burst over Silver Creek, funded jointly by both communities, Ethan stood with his family on the hill overlooking both settlements. "We did it," Mira said, wonder in her voice. "We actually did it." "Did what?" Ethan asked. "Changed things. Not everything. Not for everyone. But enough." Ayanna, standing beside him, her hand on her growing belly, their child due in fall, added, We planted seeds. What grows from them won't be Apache or white. It'll be both. Neither. Something new. Helona, ever the teacher said, we'll need new words for what we're becoming. Family, Nina said simply. That word works in every language. As the fireworks ended and people began heading home mixing freely now, Apache and white established and new Sheriff Morrison approached. Federal government's sending an inspector, wants to see what we're doing here, might become a model for other territories. Or they might shut us down, Ethan said. Possible, but I don't think so. What you've built here, it's what the country claims to be, but rarely is. They need success stories. After everyone had gone, the 6 original inhabitants of Walker Ranch sat on the porch watching stars emerge. The leather cord that bound them as family had stretched to encompass so much more. My mother, Nina said suddenly, used to say that the strongest basket is woven from different materials. Willow for flexibility, pine root for strength, bare grass for beauty. Each alone is limited. Together, they hold everything. We're a basket, Chenoa asked amused. We're a beginning, Ayana corrected, of something that hasn't existed before. The ranch spread below them peaceful in starlight. Beyond the new settlement's fires glowed warm. And further still, Silver Creek's lights twinkled a town transforming itself one choice at a time. They had started as refugees and hermit broken people seeking shelter. They had become family then, community then something larger, a new way of being in a land scarred by old wounds. The scars remained, they always would. But scars Ethan had learned were just proof of survival. And survival, when shared, became foundation for something better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The federal inspector, the harvest, the baby, the continuing work of building bridges where walls had stood. But tonight, 6 people who had rebuilt themselves from ashes sat together grateful for the journey that had brought them here. They had faced the worst and chosen to build the better. That was their victory. That was their gift to the future. That was their love. The federal inspector arrived on a morning when golden aspens were just beginning to turn. September 1882, the air crisp with promise of coming winter. His name was Charles Worthington, sent from Washington to evaluate what newspapers had begun calling the Silver Creek experiment. Ethan met him at the property line, Ayana beside him, despite being heavy with child. Worthington was younger than expected, with keen eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Walker, Mrs. Walker, I've read the reports. Now I need to see the truth. What he saw over the next 3 days challenged every assumption he'd brought. The integrated school, where Apache and white children learned together. The medical clinic where Chenoa and Dr. Bryant had combined their knowledge treating patients regardless of race or ability to pay. The market where Apache crafts sold alongside ranch goods, creating an economy that enriched both communities. But it was the harvest celebration that convinced him. Both communities had combined their traditions. Apache harvest songs mixed with frontier fiddle music. Traditional dances shared the same ground as square dancing. The feast included Apache fry bread and settlers' apple pie venison prepared 2 ways corn from Ayana's field, seasoned with Mira's herbs. Worthington watched Nina teaching a group of mixed children, Apache White Mexican, a game that seemed to combine elements from all cultures. He saw rough miners trading respectfully with Apache grandmothers. He witnessed Pastor Williams and the Apache elder DeSoto discussing their different yet similar concepts of the divine. This shouldn't work, he told Ethan that evening. Most things that matter shouldn't work on paper. The government wants to replicate this, create more integrated communities. You can't replicate choosing to see each other as human. That has to happen one person at a time. Worthington's report would later become a foundation document for new policies, though implementation would take decades and never quite capture what made Silver Creek special. But that was still to come. The child arrived with the first snow. October 15th, 1882. just as dawn painted the mountains rose and gold. The birth was difficult. Ayanna labored for hours with Mira and Chenoa, attending their combined knowledge crucial when complications arose. Ethan paced outside, the other women keeping vigil with him. Half the town seemed to gather in the yard waiting. When the baby's cry finally came strong and clear, a cheer went up that echoed off the mountains. A girl, dark hair like her mother, gray eyes like her father, a bridge between worlds from her first breath. "What will you name her?" Pastor Williams asked when he was allowed to visit. Ayanna, exhausted but radiant, looked at Ethan. They'd discussed this. "Hope," Ethan said. "In English, Hope. In Apache, Delaney. Same meaning, different sounds." "Hope Walker," Morrison said, having arrived with official documents. "First child born to the new Silver Creek, the integrated Silver Creek." Nina, now officially adopted as their daughter, though 18 and independent, held her new sister carefully. She'll never know a world where Apache and White can't be family. For her, this will be normal. "That's the point," Ayanna said softly, "to make the impossible normal for the next generation." The christening 2 weeks later was unprecedented. Pastor Williams performed the Christian ceremony, while DeSoto offered Apache blessings. The entire town attended, even those who'd resisted integration. A baby, it seemed, could bridge gaps that adults couldn't. Samuel Colby, who'd been among the strongest opponents, brought a hand-carved cradle. "Child's got no say in being born mixed," he said gruffly. "Least we can do is give her a soft place to sleep." Winter settled over Silver Creek, but it felt different than previous years. The two settlements had learned to support each other through hardship. When the Apache settlements well froze, the town shared water without being asked. When influenza struck the town, Chenoa's medicines were freely given. On Christmas Eve, something magical happened. Without planning, both communities converged on the town square. Apache singers joined the church choir. Traditional stories were shared alongside readings from the Bible. Children of all backgrounds received gifts gathered by all adults. Mrs. Cleary, now 71, stood with tears freezing on her cheeks. "I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime. People choosing to be human together." Spring came again, and with it, unexpected visitors. A delegation of Apache chiefs come to see if the stories were true. They were received not just at Walker Ranch, but in the town hall officially with dignity. One chief, ancient and weathered, spoke through Halona's translation. "We have fought the white man for generations, but here we see another way. Not surrender, not victory, something else." Mayor Hendricks, he'd been elected after Morrison stepped down to focus on peacekeeping, responded, "We're writing new rules, making mistakes, but trying." "Trying is all the spirits ask," the chief replied. By summer, Walker Ranch had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. Mixed couples arrived seeking acceptance. Displaced Apache sought community. Even white families tired of frontier violence came looking for something better. Not all stayed. The life was hard, the integration harder, but enough remained to grow both communities. The anniversary of the confrontation with Brennan was marked not with celebration, but with remembrance. A stone marker was placed where the battle had occurred, inscribed in English and Apache. Here neighbors chose to stand together. May we always choose the same. It was Nina who spoke at the dedication, now a teacher in her own right. "Violence brought us together, but love kept us together. We are proof that the cycle of revenge can be broken, that Apache and White can share more than land. We can share life." As 1883 drew to a close, Ethan stood once more on the hill overlooking both settlements. Hope, just over a year old, toddled between her parents, babbling in a mixture of English and Apache that would become the natural tongue of Silver Creek's children. The extended family had gathered for sunset. Mira showing her age but still strong. Chenoa, whose medical practice now served 3 towns. Halona, whose school had become a model for integrated education. Nina engaged to James Patterson, the blacksmith's son. Their marriage would be another bridge between communities. "Did you imagine this?" Ayanna asked Ethan. "When they first arrived at your door, I imagined nothing, expected nothing, just knew I couldn't turn them away. And now I can't imagine any other life." Sheriff Morrison arrived with news. Federal government's approved funding for a permanent school, a medical facility, infrastructure for both communities. "We're official then?" Mira asked. "More than official. We're the future." That night, as stars emerged sharp and bright, two communities that had become one celebrated quietly. No fireworks, no speeches, just families, mixed, chosen, complicated, sharing meals and stories. In the Apache settlement, drums beat a rhythm of acceptance. In the town church, bells rang harmony. And between them, at Walker Ranch, 6 people who'd started as strangers sat watching their expanded family, their integrated community, their impossible made real. "My mother was right," Nina said softly, "about finding each other at exactly the right time." "All our mothers were right," Ayanna added, holding hope close. "About survival being more than breathing. It's about creating something worth passing on." The leather cord that had bound 5 women and 1 man as family had become a web connecting dozens, then hundreds. Each strand individual, but strengthened by its connection to others. They had started with nothing but need and proximity. They had built something that politicians would study, that historians would debate, that children would take for granted. A place where Apache and white were equally human, equally valid, equally home. The West was still wild. Prejudice still existed. Violence still threatened. But in Silver Creek, Colorado, in the year 1883, people had chosen differently. Had chosen to see enemies as neighbors, strangers as family, impossible, as inevitable. That was their legacy. Not that they'd eliminated hatred, but that they'd proven love was stronger. Not that they'd erased differences, but that they'd celebrated them. Not that they'd forgotten the past, but that they'd refused to let it define the future. As the fire died to embers and families drifted home, Ethan held his daughter up to see the stars. "All of this is yours," he whispered. "The pain that brought us here, the love that kept us here, the hope you're named for." Hope reached for the stars with both hands, laughing, and in that laugh was the sound of the future, mixed, complicated, beautiful, and free. The ending was really a beginning. The story of Silver Creek would continue through generations, each adding their thread to the tapestry. But the foundation had been laid by 6 broken people who'd chosen to heal together, who'd proven that family isn't about blood, but about choice, and that sometimes the greatest courage is simply opening your door to those who need shelter. That was the true message of Silver Creek. We are all refugees from something. We are all seeking shelter. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, we find that shelter in each other. The West had been won not by conquest, but by compassion. Not by supremacy, but by synthesis. And in a small valley in Colorado, beneath stars that didn't care about the boundaries humans drew, a new kind of American story had been written. One where the ending wasn't about who won, but about how everyone chose to live together after the fighting stopped. That choice renewed daily was the greatest victory of all.